Hey guys, and happy Friday. I hope that you had a great week. We are at the close of our second week of our Genesis study this week. We read chapters 12 through 23. I thought that rather than going through all the things that I found interesting this week, we would just recap what the main um, kind of topics were in the chapters. There's a lot to cover, so I'll do my best to keep this video as short as possible. I know last week's was really long because it was just me talking about all the things that I found interesting and didn't know before. So I figured we'd kind of just focus on what was happening in the Word so that we can get through it a little bit quicker. And would again love to have any kind of comments or thoughts that you've had still though. Feel free to comment below or to email me, or we can talk in person if you know me, or however you want to get in contact with me. I'd love to talk about these readings because there's a lot happening. This is really, these chapters 12 through 23 are a lot of the fundamentals of morals and values coming up that we face today are being addressed in some of these chapters, as well as we're really getting the foundation of biblical characters and the layout of where the land was and where everything was. So it's kind of interesting. We have Abram, which later became Abraham, as the core character of these chapters, and it's really about him and his wife Sarah and his children, and their story is really unfolding in these chapters. God called Abraham as a prophet of his, and he was given a lot of responsibilities, and he needed to be faithful to God in any and every situation, which he was. He wasn't a perfect man. He made some mistakes, and his wife made some mistakes. But it's interesting to see how the foundation of Abraham's life really became the core for our Christian walk. So we have the call to him. God promises that he is going to give Abraham all this land and all of the things that he needs to be taken care of if he is faithful to the Lord. And so that's the first sign of an inheritance that, similar to what we see today from either grandparents or parents when they pass on, they give us an inheritance. This is the first sign of God giving a human an inheritance, and then that inheritance going on from Abraham to all of his descendants. So it's kind of interesting to keep that in mind. We deal a lot with Abraham and his nephew Lot in the first few chapters here of our readings, and then we go on to God's covenant with Abraham, again about promising that he will have descendants to take on what he's promised him. And there's an element of doubt in Abraham and his wife Sarah, because they were older and they were childless, and how was he going to in fact be able to pass on this land that he has in all of his other possessions when he didn't have somebody to pass it on to. There's an element of doubt in this, as well as just skepticism. However, he was having to hold on to that faith. We see Abraham and Sarah really go through a time of wondering how this is going to happen. And this is one of the first situations in the Bible where we see God promise something to a human, and the human take on the responsibility that was God's. And we see Sarah then go to her maidservant Hagar and say, sleep with him. She slept with her husband. She said, you can go ahead and sleep with my husband because we need a son for our inheritance. Hagar becomes pregnant with her son Ishmael, and Sarah becomes jealous of this because here's this maidservant who slept with her husband so that they could have a child, but she then sees it's not really her child. And there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of strange things that happen here, but I think the core point of this, sorry, my computer's about to die. The core point of this is really, again, God promising something and humans taking into their own hands something that he didn't orchestrate, which many of us do today. So, interesting story there. We then see the covenant of circumcision being brought into light here in chapter 17, something that is, again, ritual that is still done today, but there are also a lot of elements in that that go along with that word circumcision. It's not even just the act of the physical part of it. There's a lot of different ways that that word circumcision is used throughout the Bible. So that's something I would recommend reading into, or if that's something that you find interesting and want to dive into a little bit more. And we then move forward into um, the lands of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is huge in these sections of reading because this is really starting to identify morals, values, and sins, and the way that the Christian lifestyle and the way that God has, um, for lack of a better term, ordered Christians to live. Those foundational stances are right here in Genesis, these first few chapters of Genesis, specifically Genesis 19. Sorry, stumbling on my words. But for any of you who may be watching this who are maybe not Christians or didn't grow up in the faith and are just watching this out of curiosity, a lot of things about homosexuality, adultery, drunkenness come from this chapter 19, as well as some other sections in Genesis. So if you've ever been interested into why Christians believe certain beliefs on those topics, it's stated a lot here in Genesis, and that's where some of the foundation, it is throughout the Bible as well. In the later Testament, there's a lot of mention of homosexuality and why God does not want us to take part in that behavior. But the two towns or cities or villages of Sodom and Gomorrah were so corrupt that God just had enough of it, and he destroyed the land and wiped it clear because there was so much sin taking part there. Similar to when he cleared the complete earth of all sin because man had become evil, and he took Noah, similar to what we were talking about last week. He wiped it clean. He wiped these lands clean of it, which is just such a telling sign of how God feels about sin. We then go on to how Abram and Sarah finally do conceive a child, and Sarah has her son Isaac, and how God again was faithful no matter what. She was, I believe Abraham was 99 and Sarah was 90 when she had Isaac. I apologize if I have that wrong, but they were old. And something that seemed completely impossible was not impossible with God. So key to that. It's interesting then we see in chapter 22 how Abraham is tested with his one and only son. God tests to see how faithful Abraham is going to be. He finally gives him a son, and then he asks him to put him on an altar and to almost kill him. But Abraham does it because of his faith for God, and God saves Isaac and doesn't actually have him kill his son. Like it's a very interesting story, and it kind of makes you wonder, I think, sometimes about what is God thinking when he's trying to teach us these lessons. But again, I think it just proves that if you're faithful to him, he's going to be faithful to you. We then go through chapter 23 about the death of Sarah, and then we're going to start tomorrow with chapter 24, talking about Isaac and Rebecca. So again, those were just the really, that's like the cliff notes of the cliff notes of those chapters. But I encourage you to read through them if you haven't had a chance yet this week, and really soak in some of these hot topics that are being covered in these chapters. And it's going to get confusing, I understand. I'm already starting to get caught up on some of the names that I can't pronounce, and the places, and I posted a map earlier if you guys are interested from that concordance I've been following, that covers the lands kind of talked about in chapter 12. So if you're interested in starting to see some of those things visually, I'll always do my best to post any kind of resource that I get. Also, I encourage you to go to the InterVarsity Press websites that every night when I post the discussion board question, or the discussion board discussion post. I'm in MBA program online, and we have discussion board questions, so I'm in the mindset of that. But in our discussion questions I post at night, I always put the link for that week's study with InterVarsity Press, and they have a lot more background history as well as additional questions to think through. So I encourage you, if you really want to go above and beyond, to go ahead and do that, or even not even to go above and beyond, but simply just to learn the context and the history behind each chapter. It is helpful. Finally, I'm almost done here, under my 10 minutes, yes. Feel free to always post prayer requests, either on the discussion posts on our Facebook page, here on YouTube, or you can email me at verse27page@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to pray for you. All right, guys, I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye.